So we'll spend five minutes at least trying to do a sort of a recap over the last session, which was a very crucial session where we touched upon how Jesus is debating with the Pharisees and the scribes over all the purity rituals that were so much very dominant in Jewish society at this point of time during his time. So let me run through the presentation, share the slides. Just give me a moment, please. Can you see? I think I'm visible. This was the entire chapter. This was the entire chapter that we were going through last time. And we had seen how the Pharisees and the scribes, they attacked Jesus' disciples because maybe they had just returned from the marketplace and they watched them very closely that they start eating without washing their hands. And this becomes the trigger point for them, to run Jesus down and, question him as to why his disciples don't adhere to the purity regulations, that is the Pharisaic traditions, which were very dominant at that point of time. And Jesus uses this occasion to launch a sort of a counter attack against the Pharisees and the scribes. Remember, they had come down all the way from Jerusalem and they gathered around him, questioning him, why is it that your disciples don't observe, the traditions of the elders, the so-called traditions of the elders, which last time we had, at great length gone into, looking as how the Mishnaic tradition, how the Mishnah and the Talmud was put together, up to 400 years later. And all those traditions, actually the source of those traditions were much before the time of Jesus also. They were codified around 200 CE, but before that time also, during the time when the temple stood, the temple was still there at that point of time, and Jesus was, going about his preaching and healing ministry. These traditions were something that had a stranglehold on the people. So Jesus launches a counter-attack and he picks up that particular, he says that, you wash your cups, pots and all, and he's criticizing the mitzvot, that is the purity regulations that we very strictly adhere to. But at the same time, he says that your hearts are far away from God. And in this is actually echoing the prophet Isaiah, where he says that it is you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far away from me. And then he cites one very classic example of Qurban. We have seen what Qurban meant. It was any dedication that was made to God, something that was pledged to God, which could not be used, it could not be utilized for human consumption. And most of the time, this particular Qurban law affected the fourth commandment, among the 10 commandments, the fourth commandment, honor your father and mother, which was supposed to be a very core precept, not only of Judaism, but even today in Islam and in the Catholic faith. We pay a lot of importance, and the ancient societies to lay great emphasis on honoring your mother and your father, looking after them in their old age. So Jesus criticizes them, saying that, those of you who want to very conveniently absolve yourself from your obligations towards your parents, you cite Qurban, you say that, whatever earnings that were left, that were to be used for the welfare of your parents, you have dedicated it to God through a vow. And a vow that is made, it cannot be broken. But we have also seen how, like, the priest could, absolve them from a vow by simply refusing to accept whatever was offered as Qurban. And the second group of people, which Philo of Alexandria, the Jewish philosopher, who was a contemporary of Jesus himself, Philo of Alexandria, in many of his treatises, one of them he mentions that it was the Pharisees who, commanded a lot of respect from the common people, and so they too had the power to release a person from this pledge that was made, which would be a hindrance to look after your parents. But what would the Pharisees most of the time do? They wouldn't. They were so rigid in that adherence to their own traditions that in the bargain they forgot that they were actually watering down what was written in the Torah. And so here we see Jesus when he comes defending the commandment of honoring your father and mother as laid down in the Decalogue, that is the 10th commandment. It is God's Son defending God's law. And citing this classic example, he comes down very fiercely on the Pharisees, attacking all their daily things. We have looked, at length. I will run you through the list. Like we have seen, I had shared with you lots of pictures and all how, like the Pharisees, why they were so very, rigid about their Pharisaic traditions, especially about ritual purity, because they felt that not only the temple priests who are required to remain in a perpetual condition of ritual purity, it doesn't apply to them, but it applies also to all Israel, because all Israel as people of God, they become priests. Okay, they are priests of God. So priesthood was something they felt was not only exclusive. Purity was not exclusive only to the priest, but it also applied to the common man. And this became a sort of a big burden, and that is why I shared with you pictures about how they had those ritual immersion pools, the mikvah, these were the kosher laws, the food laws also. Today we will be talking about them. They came out with something called kashrut, wherein food also was considered some foods pure, some foods not pure. So those that were not pure, they were called treif or treifa. And food that was fit for consumption and considered to be holy and pure was considered to be kosher, which even today rabbinic Jews are very particular about kosher laws. These were those ritual immersion pools. I had shared with you this detail that almost 48 mikvahot they are called. Mikvahot is the ritual immersion pool, 7-step this. So in order to remove the impurity, like for example, if they went also in Gentile territory, that was also considered to be polluting. So in order to become, ritually pure, you have to come and immerse yourself in this mikvah. Okay, so all these laws of purity, they were very sort of like a noose around the neck of the people, and these Pharisees and scribes were very particular. So almost more than 613 interpretations of the laws which they made binding on the common people. So these were this. Okay, 7-step rule in order to make yourself ritually pure again. This was an example of that plaque which was part of the balustrade surrounding the inner courts of Jerusalem temple, which prohibited, okay, there was the outermost court of the temple of Jerusalem, it was called the court of the Gentiles. So, there were many among the Gentiles, there were some people called, God-fearing people who had great respect for the laws of the Jews. So they would come and offer their offerings and all to the temple, but there was a space that was restricted to them beyond which they couldn't go. So this is that balustrade that no foreigner may enter beyond this railing. So part of this balustrade is part of the excavations which were carried out, and this particular thing was discovered. So similarly, all this, because of this ritual purity thing, stone jars and all, they were very particular about all stone vessels, even their tableware and all. They were obsessed with having vessels and all which would not catch any impurity. So stone was considered to be very impervious, it would not be polluted, and so they would prefer to have this. But we have to also remember that these vessels and all were very expensive and difficult to make, and that is the reason Jerusalem had a very thriving this industry of all the stone craftsmen who made all these things on lathes, which were very expensive to do. So probably most of the time it was the elite who are very particular about this. Okay, all this I have already shared with you. So this is the tradition of the elders that Jesus kept attacking. Now we'll continue today with this was all part of chapter 7. The only latter part, the ending part, we will be beginning with today. So here it is. We begin with session 17. That was a recap what I've done. When Jesus was attacking the Qurban, okay, he mentions when Mark is mentioning about this, how Jesus got into this debate, heavy debate with this, citing the example of Qurban, and I have already told you how Philo of Alexandria also mentions to us two ways of granting release from these vows. There was one way of doing it, and that was by Josephus tells us about this, that priest required 50 shekels from a man to be released from this Qurban, and if it was a woman, okay, who had made a vow and wanted release, there was a way to release, and that was what? By giving money. 30 from a woman to cancel Qurban, and this is attested to us by Josephus in his book on the Jews, that is Antiquities of the Jews. He writes the entire history of the Jewish people, just like how he writes an entire, not only one volume, several volumes about the war that brought down the Temple of Jerusalem. So in this book of the Antiquities, Josephus mentions that the priest would demand 50 shekels and 30 shekels from a man and woman respectively to grant release. And Craig Evans, in his book on Jesus and his world, he mentions this very telling insight. Jesus' opposition to Qurban, this was a stand that Jesus had taken. And so obviously this must have radiated everywhere, and it must have been passed on to all the Pharisaic circles, including the Sadducees, the Jerusalem priesthood and all. So these were things that Jesus was taking a stand against them. So Craig Evans in his book points out this. Jesus' opposition to Qurban would have annoyed the temple establishment which benefited from such vows. Why? Because in case if it was land that was offered as Qurban and all, it was something that nobody could touch. It was only for the use of God. So obviously it was dedicated to the temple. So when it is dedicated to the temple, naturally it becomes the property, the real estate of the temple, and this is how the temple priesthood became very, very rich, and so much so that even corruption finally began to water down their ideals. So makes this telling comment that this must be the reason that Jesus, when he attacked the opposition to Qurban, it must have had a very big ripple effect. Let us see what it is. I want to, share with you this picture about the shekel. When we talk about 50 shekels and 30 shekels, it was quite a huge amount of money. Now, what was this shekel? This shekel was the temple tax, which every Jew of 20 years of age had to pay into the Jerusalem temple treasury. And when normally this used to be done, it normally used to be done during the time of Passover or any of the other main feasts. Okay, so there was this feast of unleavened bread. So you had also Pentecost, which was called the Shavuot, and you had the harvest festival called Sukkot. So these were days of great assembly wherein Jews from not only from all over Judea and Palestine, but also from the diaspora region, right from Babylon, Alexandria, Cyrenaica, from all over the world they would come, and very faithfully they would deposit this temple tax to the Jerusalem temple treasury. So when we talk about this half shekel, it is very interesting to note that this Jerusalem priesthood, it came from among the Sadducees. It was mandatory that this temple tax had to be paid only in this, okay, this Tyrian half shekel. It came from Tyre, okay, and Tyre is a place where we will be dealing today very extensively. And in Judaism, it was strictly forbidden not to have any graven images, be it of a human being or an animal also. Only fruits and other things, trees and all were allowed. But this Tyrian half shekel, which was mandatory to be put in the Jerusalem treasury, this had to be bought at the temple precincts. Remember, Jesus turned the tables of the money changers. Who were these money changers? These were the same people who would change the local currency. The local people did not have this half shekel and all with them. it had to be bought only from the Jerusalem temple priesthood. So they would come and they would put in their denarius or whatever was their local currency, sometimes 2 or 3, depending on what was the content of the silver in their local currency. And they had to buy this tetradrachma also, it was called sometimes. So this Tyrian currency was what they had to pay to the temple treasury, and this is how Jerusalem temple was very rich. The Tyrian coins were preferred for their purity in silver, which contained approximately 7 grams of silver, and the Roman denarius, which was a coin of the Roman period, was a day's wage at the time of Jesus. So 1 day's wage was equivalent to 1 denarius, and it contained 3 to 3.4 grams of silver. So 2 denarius were equivalent to 1 Tyrian coin, the half shekel. So when they were buying, this was the local currency with which they had to exchange. Interestingly, there's a scholar who has made a deep study about this, and he shares this very beautiful insight. He's saying when you look at the value of silver and convert it to today's modern currency, it approximately comes to something between 50 to 75 US dollars. If you convert it in today's rate, $1 is 85 rupees, more or less, approximately. If you convert that, it comes to around 4,250 rupees to 6,375. So imagine, would this not be a huge amount to be put into a temple treasury for a common man? Definitely, even as per today's standards, we would find this amount quite high, isn't it? So this is how the temple is operated, okay? And people felt, they were obligated to pay into this. Later on, afterwards, on this, before that, I forgot to mention this. Look at the person whose face is there on this Tyrian half shekel. Who is this? This is supposed to be the Tyrian god. Remember the people of Tyre, Sidon and all, they were Phoenicians. Actually the Canaanites, old Canaanites of the entire Mesopotamian region. So this was the god Baal in the Old Testament. So he was some sort of, a version of Baal who was worshipped by the people of Tyre and also Sidon, the god called Melkart, and this is his emblem, the falcon. Later on, during the Jewish revolt and all, they were very much against this, so they minted their own coins, the rebels, and this was how they had come out with a temple tax. So this is it. This was the coinage of Herod Antipas. So people going from Galilee, they obviously had to take these coins and exchange it to buy the Tyrian shekel. Now we go on further. Then after that is over, Jesus then called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile." So towards the end, after that debating, to and fro goes on after Jesus attacks them and brings out all their purity regulations. When he is rounding up the entire debate, he makes this summary statement saying that remember, it is nothing from outside, like they always felt that it was foods that were impure foods, if consumed, would render a person impure. But Jesus is pointing out a very vital existential fact, that it is not things from outside that will bring defilement. Defilement in terms of ethics, okay, in terms of ethical purity. Nothing from outside can defile you. On the contrary, it is the other way around. It is things from within you, the heart being the seat of all emotion. What comes from there actually defiles a person. Okay, so here I put out the explanation here for you. Generic for crowd when he is calling out. Again, a riddle for the crowds who would not know how far to press. Jesus summons them to hear and understand when he says, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand." There was a crowd that was watching this debate, and Jesus was fiercely engaged with the Pharisees and the scribes on one side. Once that is done, he turns to the people and he makes this proclamation. Okay, this was what something like even Yohanan ben Zakkai, the great rabbi who was the founding member of gathering all the Mishnaic traditions after the fall of the Jerusalem temple, he is also known to take this type of stand. Like, this was a standard way of addressing people. Listen, listen, all of you, and understand. Oh, this is what is sacred here. Let's go further. In order that they may indeed look and not perceive, and may indeed listen but not understand, so that they may not turn again and be forgiven. Here Mark mentions this is what was mentioned earlier for in chapter 4. This has just been, replayed over you, because constantly Jesus is drawing the attention of his hearers, and it is obvious that not everybody is able to understand. When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about the parable. He said to them, "Then do you also fail to understand? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile?" Jesus had not gone to explain further when he made that, about that statement about things from outside not defiling a person, but things from within. So when they are together, okay, in the house, the 12, his 4 disciples, they asked him this, and that time Jesus turns on them, standard way of sort of rebuking them. Do you not see whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart but the stomach and goes out into the sewer? This is understandable, okay? What we eat, it is ingested, then digested, and then thrown out to the body. So he's saying those things cannot really render us impure, but it is evil intentions which he will further go on saying that. Thus he declared all foods clean. I have highlighted this in brown because this is not Jesus' statement, but this is an observation of Mark. It is his interpretation that when he made this statement, he declared that all foods are clean. But these are not the words that actually come out from the mouth of Jesus. Okay? What enters from outside, let us analyze this a little bit further. Now, what enters from outside enters not the heart but the stomach. And look at in Mark's this, okay? The heart is given a lot of importance in Mark's narrative. There is a lot of importance because there are many statements, expressions in the narrative wherein he talks about the heart. Like for example in Mark 12:30, which will be coming later on, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. Hearts of Jesus' critics and opponents, how he mentions about them, how their hearts were, hardened. They were questioning in their hearts, and Jesus could make that out. Similarly, in Mark 3, chapter 3, verse 5, he looked around at the Pharisees with anger, and he was grieved at their hardness of heart. So all these expressions we have put out just to emphasize that in the Gospel of Mark, how the heart being the seat of all human emotion and also the seat of human intention, heart was considered not only the area from which feelings would emanate, but also thinking in the ancient days was always associated not so much with the head but more with the heart. So the heart was the seat of all thinking and all emotion, and that is why Mark also gives a lot of importance to it. Look at the heart of Jesus' disciples, Mark 6:52, which we have also already gone through. For they did not understand when that multiplication of the loaves, okay, their hearts were hardened. We will see that today again. And Mark 8:17, are your hearts hardened? We will see now that. Okay? We'll go further. And that's how Jesus concludes that Isaiah prophesied rightly about you and condemns them as hypocrites, okay, because their hearts are far away from God. Regarding food, okay, Jesus says that he has declared all foods clean. These are just put out some explanations for you to go through, especially in the book of the Old Testament, Leviticus and Deuteronomy. You find this about which foods are pure and from where do they come? They actually comes from mostly from the book of Leviticus, from the Torah. The book of Leviticus, especially chapter 11, it talks about impure foods, akathatos it is called in Greek, 13 times. And Deuteronomy chapter 14 talks about impure foods 4 times. So Jesus, when he says, okay, he says that the heart cannot be defiled with food that comes from outside. When he is purifying all the foods, it is through the power of his word that he does it. Okay? Matthew, and I just put out this also, a sort of a comparison. The same thing is also reported in the Gospel of Matthew, but Matthew in his Gospel omits mention of that for his presumably Jewish audience, because remember, the Jewish audience, they were all practicing kosher, and so he has to take it for granted that they are aware of this. Whereas Mark, on the contrary, is addressing a mixed audience and predominantly a Gentile audience, and so definitely not a kosher following audience. And so Jesus is speaking of foods and ritual impurity. We have to know that he's not talking about food as nutritional intake. This I've just put this out for you. Now we come to the main this when we are coming to verses 24. The episode of the Syrophoenician woman and the faith that she demonstrates. Now, before I go on, let me show you, the Jesus, all this while, okay, he has been around this place of Galilee, all these other places that he has been going. He is now in Gentile territory, okay. He is come here to Tyre. Now this episode that we will be taking is all focused here. But look at the places that he has been going. He has been over here, and he's walking great distances, coming also to Caesarea Philippi. Again he comes over here, and then from here he's coming here to Tyre, and there is above another city called Sidon. Tyre and Sidon and Byblos, they were, three very important great cities of Syrophoenicia. And our entire drama now is going to unfold over here. Take you back. Let us read the text over here, this pericope of the Syrophoenician woman's faith, and how Jesus, upholds her as an example of unwavering faith among the people gathered there. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. Now I've just shown you how far it has been. So Jesus probably was walking very great distances along with his 4 disciples, with his team. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. In Mark's characteristic style, he narrates this whole incident in a very racy manner. But let us break this down and see the intensity and the drama that unfolds over here. Okay, and this is that beautiful way how she comes over and begs with him. Okay, this is the same picture in color. I find this very impressive. That's why I put it out for you. Now Jesus, when he is going, he went there to Tyre to obviously get away from the crowds, as we have just said. Okay, this was like an escape route for him, and that is why he went far up north into Gentile territory. And remember, today's Tyre is today's Lebanon. It is not part of Israel. Okay, and the other Gentile territories that we will be covering in this episode are in the Decapolis. That is the region of Jordan. So you can imagine, Jesus was not traveling on a donkey. He had no horse cart or anything like that. It was on his feet that he was on the move. So they were, actually straddling great number of miles in order to reach out. So here he comes. Now remember, Tyre is a Phoenician colony It is a Greek city. It is not part of Israel at all. So here also Jesus actually is breaking boundaries, because going into Gentile territory also was violative of the purity laws. Okay, because going Gentile territory was considered to be impure. Interacting with the Gentiles was considered to be impure. So here, despite that, Jesus, the normal boundary breaker, we find him here. So he's gone to one house, probably must be definitely a Jewish home. There were, though Tyre and Sidon, and also Byblos, these major cities, had predominantly Greek populations. These were also cities where there were sizable pockets of Jews, okay, diaspora Jews living over there. So there were Jews over here. So no reason is given as to why Jesus' movement to the northwest, this is right up to the region of Tyre, is given by Mark, an area with a mixed population, except that he says that he wanted to withdraw from the throngs that were, pressing on him in Galilee. During the times of Jesus, there was a land bridge that connected Tyre, the island, with Tyre, the mainland. I will share with you pictures now. Tyre was considered to be a very grand city, a city of very great Hellenistic grandeur. And not only Hellenist, when we talk about Hellenistic grandeur is something that comes only post Alexander's, coming to these places. But much before that, even during much earlier, during the times of Solomon too, Solomon had a great friend and a king of Tyre called Hiram. Hiram of Tyre was the one who had supplied the cedars of Lebanon. No? So Tyre was rich in the cedar wood. So cedars was very strong timber, which was provided for the building of the Jerusalem temple, and it was provided by the king, this Hiram. Also, we know Jezebel, who had a classic confrontation all the time with our great prophet Elijah. She was also a Persian, Sidonian princess. So basically from the same cultural sphere, Tyre and Sidon were supposed to be like twin cities. So the land of Israel had a connection with Tyre and Sidon much earlier, even before the dawn of Hellenism and Alexander's conquest. But during that time, okay, Tyre, it was basically divided into two. You had the island and you had the mainland. So island was obviously jutting into the ocean, but it was the island which was a grander place compared to the mainland. So all the elite, okay, the noble class, the nobility was all, stationed there in the island part of Tyre. And they had, immense beautiful mansions of marble and all. And Tyre had two natural harbors, and that is the reason this entire Syrophoenician region of Tyre and Sidon, because of the ports and all they were a very rich mercantile community. They were seafaring people. They were merchants, who went as far as the Mediterranean. Later on, we will also learn they had established that huge, beautiful colony called Carthage, which is modern day Tunisia and Morocco, which gave a great competition to Rome itself. Okay, Carthage was supposed to be the seat of excellence in, anything that civilization can boast to be. So Carthage was also a colony in North Africa, which was actually built by this Phoenicians. The people who were along the Mediterranean coast, they were called the Libo-Phoenicians, and those that were bordering northern Israel, they were called Syro-Phoenicians, because they were touching almost Syria, Palestine. The Syro-Phoenician woman was thus a Greek woman descended from the Greek settlers, colonists since Alexander's times. Alexander, he actually came to destroy the city of Tyre, but then afterwards he resettled it. Why? Because the people of Tyre, when he came from Egypt and he was on his way to Babylon, to Persia and all, he went via Tyre and Sidon along the Levantine coast, along this place. And so everybody, they bowed down and they accepted the sovereignty of Alexander, but not the Tyrians. They refused to bow down to Alexander, and they held out, they were very confident that they had huge fortified forts. They had those two natural harbors. So the entire city along the island was a very fortified city. So they had great confidence that Tyre could, Tyre was literally impregnable. Nobody would be able to bring down Tyre. And so Alexander's demand was they had this temple of Melkart there in that island. It was a very huge temple and it was like an iconic temple for the people over there, and they worshipped that god Melkart who was on the Tyrian chapel there. So Melkart was somehow considered to be an equivalent of the Greek god Hercules. And Alexander, towards the end of his life, was almost getting a little mad also. He thought of himself as actually God, and so he felt that he was another incarnation of Hercules. So he requested the Tyrians that he would want to come and pay homage, okay, to the god Melkart, because it was actually he was himself putting himself out as a deity over there. The Tyrians were very smart; they could see through this game plan, so they refused. And that is why Alexander didn't want to take a no for an answer, and he carried out a very devastating siege that lasted almost 7 months, and finally Tyre was very badly mauled. Okay, the citizens, many of them were crucified, almost 30,000 people were taken into slavery, and some other people only were, those who took shelter in the temple, they were the ones who were spared their lives. So this is how, Tyre was, having this ancient history much before like Jesus, walks that place over there. So this woman, definitely being a Syro-Phoenician, she belonged to the elite. After Alexander had destroyed Tyre, he resettled it with his own soldiers, with his own colonists, and again Tyre, bounced back to its normal grandeur. So obviously, these Greek settlers, they gave a different spin to this, city, and made it entirely a sort of a Greco-Roman style city with all the great hallmarks of Hellenistic culture. So here, definitely, this woman, she was no ordinary person. She was not a commoner sort, but she came from the elite class. Why we are trying to bring this out? Because the way she comes and begs at the feet of Jesus, that itself, shows the remarkable level of faith that she demonstrates and breaks all the barriers that Jesus puts up to her faith. Okay, so definitely this woman, she belonged to the ruling class citizen, therefore hailed from the elites of Phoenicia. So this is very interesting. So she belongs to the class that takes bread from out of the mouth of the oppressed class of a society. Who are the oppressed class? The poor, landless tenants, the laborers, not the elite. They just constituted most of the time barely 3 or 4% of the population. The normal population was only the ordinary peasants, okay, the common man. So they were the ones who were taking the bread out of the common people in the form of taxes. So taxes most of the time were paid in the form of grain. So even if they toiled the land, more than half of whatever was the produce was always paid back in taxes. So here when she is coming here, okay, there is a spin on those words when Jesus says, how can the food from the table be given to dogs? Okay, so here she is actually, so there's a spin over here when she's asking for the crumbs. Look at the irony, the antithesis over there. Okay, so Jesus is saying indirectly, it is like being suggested that you are the ones who take out the food from the mouth of the common man and have the best in life, and today you come begging here, okay, for the crumbs from the table of the Israelites. Okay? We'll dwell in this further. I've already told you Tyre is modern day Lebanon. This is the place. Okay, from here Jesus has gone about with his entire Galilean ministry, and then he goes here up here north Tyre. The Phoenicians were accused of worshipping false gods, worshipped Melkart on the face of the Tyrian half shekel, which I've already shared with you. And since Solomonic times, okay, King Solomon who had great relations, I explained to you, with King Hiram of Tyre, who helped him build a temple building also. So by going into Gentile territory, Jesus was once again breaking social boundaries of purity of land, as Gentile territory was considered impure by the Jews, just as the Gentiles were considered impure. Okay, later on we will see that here in Tyre there was later on, okay, a growing Christian movement which took hold over here, and there was a very strong Christian community which later on Acts tells us was also visited by Paul before he could come to Jerusalem. Why does Jesus seem to insult her when he tells her, when she's come and kneeling at his place, and she begs him to take the demon out of her daughter? Jesus seems to be very rude and harsh and outright, seems to be, comparing her to a dog by citing that analogy. But is he actually, trying to insult her? And by using in particular the analogy of dogs, why dogs in particular? Dogs were considered immoral sexually. They were considered impure by the Jewish people. So all the more, okay, the contrast is very telling and equally humiliating. And yet the woman is undeterred by this so obvious humiliation. He doesn't call her dog, but he obviously makes a comparison. Jesus poses an obstacle to her faith, but let us see how she surmounts that. How does she, when you look at the beautiful plea, a desperate mother makes at the feet of Jesus. It's like as if she says, you have so much power. You feed the 5,000, you feed the 4,000 later. Let me just have a small crumb from your table which you claim to be belonging only to your people of Israel. But Jesus is upholding her demonstration of the sonshipful faith. Okay, at that time, let me move. This is what I've explained. Okay, it is over here. This is again an earlier picture. This is the land bridge which Alexander had done, and probably Jesus must have walked over here and come over here in this mainland time, because the nobility all resided over here. So definitely Jesus was somewhere over here when the scene is unfolding. This is the land bridge using all the huge stones of the buildings of the mainland that Alexander constructed, which was there during the time of Jesus as a land bridge. Why was Tyre was also very Tyre was a very rich city. Why? Precisely because they were a mercantile, community, as I told you, a seafaring people they were great traders. But what did they primarily trade in? These murex shells. These murex shells, from this was made the great purple dye. And, and to make this purple dye, they required at least 12,000 such shellfish in order to extract that very coveted Tyrian purple from which all those purple robes were made. And that is the reason purple became the standard color only for royalty. Now, ordinary people were not allowed, only under pain of death, they could wear anything in purple. Purple came to be associated only with the royalty. This was the murex shell. These were very commonly found along the coast of Tyre and also Sidon, but more along Tyre. These are some of the pictures. We have put out through excavation. They have found it had a hippodrome. A hippodrome was like where chariot races and all used to be having. All this a court of angels. This is Sidon, just for you. This is our place. This is the Sea of Galilee, and this is the region Jesus is traversing. Imagine how he has been walking the length and breadth not only of Israel, but the whole of Syria, Palestine, and also this part is Jordan. This is Jordan, this is modern day Lebanon, and obviously Israel. This is the aerial view which was taken, which I already shared in 1934. This is again a picture. When Jesus went and the scene that is unfolding, it probably must be in the house of some rich Jew there in the city of Tyre. And normally this was a seating arrangement. So that is why Jesus talks about, food being laid out at a table. These dining halls were called the Epithenia. These were the dining banquet halls which also earlier we had seen. So probably you can imagine the setting of this. He is in a place like this where food is laid out, and Jesus is telling her that the food from the table of the children cannot be given to dogs. Now, let us analyze what are the striking facts about this encounter. She is probably seeing Jesus for the first time. She has not seen him before, but definitely she has heard a lot about him. Not only she heard, but the entire people, because there seems to be a lot of people going after him, and seeking him out, just like she seeks him out. She disregards his desire for privacy and bursts into a Jewish home where Jesus probably is dining, being hosted in a Jewish home. So she must have definitely also known how these Jews, being a very exclusive race, they were not the people who could easily mingle with the Gentiles, and definitely not table fellowship was strictly forbidden. You couldn't be eating at the same table alongside a Gentile. We will see all these, great confrontations taking place in the early church over this issue with Paul and his communities. So here also you think she was not aware? She was obviously very much aware, knowing the background that she came from and the background of the home in which she has entered, regardless of all the things. She is literally making herself so vulnerable, making herself, exposed to all humiliation. Yet for her, it is only her daughter that matters. Look at the heart of the mother. She is oblivious, totally oblivious to the surroundings, especially given the fact that she is a Greek Gentile woman with whom the Jewish people would not mingle given their purity concern, and table fellowship definitely being totally considered violative of purity regulations. She must have been well aware of the great religious, cultural, ethnic divide between herself and the people around her at that moment. Yet she burst onto that scene, and this oddity does not deter her from reaching out to Jesus. She makes herself vulnerable despite her high status amongst her own people, the Greek speaking people of the polis, Polis is, a Greek city is called Polis, and only the nobility only was considered to be the citizen class. Only they were allowed to vote. The common people were not considered citizens of the city. So here she is a citizen of the land. So naturally an elite high status woman, and yet she humbles herself, falls on her knees, exposes herself to being reviled, being ridiculed and snubbed as Jesus seems to do. She can see nothing beyond her daughter, puts herself in shame's way. She lays down all her guards, her high status, her position, her ego, and kneels before Jesus, who is a total stranger to her, imploring his healing touch. What happens? Jesus, rebuffs her with a parable, almost equating her to a dog. Yet, instead of being offended, imagine anybody else would have been so offended, no? You calling me, you're comparing me to a dog. To hell with you, I don't want anything from you, and just would have just stormed out to that Jewish home, but not this woman. Look at the persistence of her faith. She is not put out by this, insulting rebuff of Jesus. On the contrary, she turns tables on Jesus, replying with a counter parable. And what does she say? Allow me just a bit of the crumbs on the table. I don't want a part of the meal. It's as if she implores him, unspeaking without words. You who can feed the multitudes and let them have their fill, allow me just a bit of the leftovers of your table. What marvelous demonstration of faith, isn't it? And with her daring act of faith, she compels Jesus. It is like literally she forces him to the negotiating table from the banqueting table, and Jesus gives in, allowing her fervently. Even more astonishing is she takes Jesus at his word. Okay? She does not ask for any physical sign. When Jesus tells her, go home, your daughter is well, she takes him at his word. Okay? So this is even more astonishing. She accepts Jesus at his word without asking for or seeing any physical sign of confirmation of the healing. Daring to trust in the word of Jesus, she goes home and finds her daughter peacefully on the bed, as Mark tells. Nice, it would be very beautiful for us to ponder. Do we also demonstrate such childlike faith like her? Do I take Jesus at his word, or do I need all external props and proofs, like how we will see now later on, how the Pharisees and scribes, ask, demand a sign as proof that he is really carrying out the works of his Father. Now we go on to the next, we move ahead. After that, Jesus comes back, okay? He comes to the region of the Decapolis. Remember, Decapolis is our favorite place where we have encountered our great friend, the demoniac, who was healed by Jesus, okay? That Gergesene region, which I already showed you on the map. He's good, so he makes a big tour around and comes back here to the region of the Decapolis. So must have been miles and miles of walking. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee to the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had also a speech impediment. So he was a deaf king. And they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be open. Okay, Mark is translating for his Roman audience, okay, who don't understand Aramaic phrases. And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. Remember, this is the region where the demoniac, when he was healed, okay, and Jesus removed that, the legion from him and sweat it out in that herd of swine which went down the cliff and got drowned. and the people were so afraid and they told him to leave that region. But today, when Jesus is coming here, he finds a crowd, okay, waiting for him, and so much so that he is literally being pressed into. So, where do you think this proclamation about Jesus's wonder works? Who must have probably done this? Definitely, the demoniac must have been. Okay, he must have been Jesus' disciple who has made Jesus known in this region. And that's how people have come here to believe in his powers. This is the region I put up for here. The Decapolis, when we talk about the Decapolis, this is here on the Sea of Galilee. He's come here from Tyre along the Sea of Galilee, and then he's come here to this region. He must have probably gone over here to that Gergesene area, and these are the 10 cities. Decapolis means it is a place of 10 cities. It was a confederation of 10 Greek polises, and that is why it is called Deca, means 10, and polis means cities. So, confederation of 10 ancient cities. I put out the names over here: Psychopolis, Hippos, Gadara, Pella. Pella is a place when the Temple of Jerusalem, okay, when the Jewish revolt was going on, the Christian community, they say, fled over here, okay, and that's how they did not many of our Christians lost their lives in the siege of Jerusalem. Then Philadelphia, these are the places, including Damascus, okay, capital of ancient and modern Syria. So this was this entire region of the Decapolis. So this was also a place of Gentiles. That Jesus is not hindered by any purity or regulations. We then find Jesus taking the route from Tyre back to Galilee through the region of the Decapolis. Okay, he has returned. I've already explained to you. The demoniac has done his work very well, and that's how people are, huge crowds are all gathering around him. Jesus' attempt to remain out of public view continues, but he's frustrated because the crowds keep clamoring for his healing touch, and they throng after him. We go further. It is important to note that even in the region of the Decapolis, the confederation of 10 Greco-Roman cities located, okay, along the east and southeast of the Sea of Galilee and north of Perea. Though the population was predominantly Greek-speaking, there were also significant pockets of Jewish communities settled in the areas, especially since Hashmonean times and earlier. So when Syria Palestina was conquered by the Romans in 63 BC by Pompey the Great, he is called Pompeius Magnus. He was the one who first conquered, okay, Jerusalem, and the entire Syria Palestine region came under Roman control. He preferred to keep this entire area of the Decapolis separate from the Jewish territory because these cities had a very deeply Hellenistic character. They were cultural centers of Hellenistic sophistication and bore all the hallmarks of great Greek cities. Like they were, big centers of learning. They had those hippodromes, they had gymnasiums, they had theaters, they had beautiful mansions built of marble, and also these were, not only were the homes and all very beautiful, but they were also great centers of learning, especially Gadara we find. Now we go on to the next episode. Jesus feeds the 4,000. We go to chapter 8 now. We need to finish this because we will be entirely, the part of chapter 8 ends with the first. You remember when we were doing how the Gospel of Mark is set out, I had initially told you the entire Gospel narrative is divided into 3 parts. You have the first section, then you have the middle section which is called the way, and then you have the final section that is Jesus in Jerusalem. So the first section is entirely in Galilee, then the middle section is called the way section. So we need to complete today this, not the entire chapter 8, but this is part of it because till the way section I will be completing today, so that coming Sunday we go on to the next section of the Gospel of Mark. Here we find the second feeding miracle. Remember, there's already one feeding miracle reported by Mark. where Jesus has performed the miracle for 5,000 people and 12 baskets of leftovers were collected. Now this miracle obviously appears to be in Gentile territory. Jesus is here going around in the region of the Decapolis and all. So here it is a miracle which has again been worked in Gentile territory. So we can very well see that Jesus, though like certain, in synoptic expressions, we will find that it looks to be that Jesus confined himself more to the Jewish people. It is not so. He did also open up his boundaries to the Gentiles as well. In those days when there was again, in those days, in this word, in those days, we understand that the location of this action is still along Tyre, Sidon, and the Decapolis. So in those days, when there was again a great crowd without anything to eat, he called his disciples and said to them, there are remarkable similarities and parallels between both the feeding miracles. And Jesus says here, I have compassion for the crowd because they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away, hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from a great distance. Look at the care and the compassion of Jesus's heart. Okay, his disciples replied, how can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? Okay, they are in the wilderness, a place that is isolated from the main cities. And these are the same disciples, the same 12, who have already witnessed him performing a same feeding miracle for 5,000 people earlier. And yet, look at the response. From where are we going to bring food to feed these people? How can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? He asked them, how many loaves do you have? They said 7. Then he ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute, and they distributed them to the crowd. They had also a few small fish, and after blessing them, he ordered that these too be distributed. They ate and were filled, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. So look at the figure 7 here, 7 here, and 7 here. It probably could mean that since this feeding miracle is unfolding in Gentile territory, the figure 7 could be indicative of completeness. The figure 7 stood for, completeness for God's blessing. So could be that is the reason 7 is being emphasized. They ate and were filled, and so 7 baskets full were collected. And immediately they got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. Let us analyze this second feeding miracle. This miracle is performed, I told you, in Gentile territory, because in that verse, in those days, obviously seems to be that while Jesus is touring the Decapolis region. There are striking similarities, in the first feeding, which Mark reports in chapter 6, verses 30 to 46, and the second one here. There is again a great crowd without anything to eat, verse 1. It takes place again in the wilderness. So these are the similarities. So not only are these similarities, but also if you compare these two pericopes, in chapter 6 and in chapter 8, there is a remarkable similarity in the sequence of events that are reported in both these. From chapter 8, 1 to 26, it is equivalent to chapter 6, 30 to 56. In what way? First, there is a feeding miracle, then there is a crossing of the sea, and then there is healings. So this sequence is repeated in both these. Finally, Mark links the stories through a rich passage in 8:19 to 20. I will touch that later. Transitioning into something important. I put out a table for you comparing these two feeding miracles, parallels and contrast. First feeding miracle, this is the chapter. Second feeding miracle, chapter 8, verse 1 to 10. Geography, Jewish territory, Gentile region. Linguistic changes to emphasize Gentiles. If you look at the first feeding miracle, which took place in obviously the region of Galilee, the Tabgha region, probably we think, there the word used here in chapter 6, verse 41 is bless. And here in this, Jesus gave thanks. He looked up and gave thanks. Here, if you see in the first feeding miracle, the baskets were small woven baskets. Baskets predominantly in Jewish territory in Palestine and all used to be made of reeds. Okay, so here you have reed baskets woven from reeds, and here you find rope or cord baskets made from ropes. This was a distinctive Hellenistic style. So Mark maybe he is focusing on linguistic, using linguistic words in order to bring out the contrast between the two feeding miracles. And theological parallel is the most outstanding. Sorry, I forgot here. Similarly, here in the first feeding miracle, remember, they collected 12 baskets signifying the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so it echoes OT fulfillment. And here it is a figure 7, which is emphasized 3 times, which for the entire ancient people signified completeness, and that is what is being emphasized. Theological parallel is outstanding between the two. As God's shepherd cares for the people of God in the first feeding miracle, remember a prophet like Moses appears in the wilderness and God provides for manna in the desert. So those OT echoes were there in the first feeding miracle. So God takes care of his people as they were going through the wilderness. He provided them manna, he provided them quail. So just as God's shepherd cares for the people of God, that is Israel in the wilderness, God is also caring for the entire people of God, the people of all the nations in the world. So God is not only God of Israel, but he is God of all. So this is an astounding theological parallel that is brought out probably between these two territories. Remember how it ends over here? And he sent them away, and immediately he got into the boat with his disciples after 3 days spending time with the people here and providing them their fill. Jesus goes back to a district of Dalmanutha. Where is this Dalmanutha that we went to? You see, Dalmanutha is more or less been saying this is the place Magadan, which is very close to Magdala, which was a very important city in the Galilee, okay, along the shores. It was a port city, it was a coastal city of the Galilee. So Dalmanutha is a place they say more or less here, Magadan it was called, okay, on the west side of the Sea of Tiberias. So maybe, okay, via boat he crossed over and he came here to this place. Scholars speculate that Dalmanutha was the ancient Magadan, which was a place very close to Magdala, the place from where Mary Magdalene hailed, and which had a very thriving fish trade that was carried out by the Jewish people. This is one thing I would like to share. This is a boat that has been, entire boat from the time of Jesus, 2000-year-old. It is famously called the Galilee boat, which was discovered in 1986. And they say this was discovered, okay, around the town by the Sea of Galilee. It was here at Dalmanutha, okay, which was where it was actually found. So maybe it had some connection to the city of Magdala. This is modern day pictures of Dalmanutha. See how Jesus must have crossed over here and come to this place. This I put out for you for your own for your own understanding about the further knowledge about this place, Dalmanutha. How it was a place where there was thriving fishing town, okay, which was excavated belonging to the first century. And in the archaeological excavation, the team has found weights and stone anchors, while the presence of vessel glass and amphorae. Amphorae were huge, pots which were used to transport wine, oil, and all in the ships. Collectively, they are called amphorae. Single one is called amphora. suggests some residents were very, very prosperous around this region. So many a times we, today archaeology is pointing out to a very important fact that the people of Galilee were not people from backwaters. Many a time people are given the impression that, people from Galilee compared to the people of Jerusalem, they were people who were, more rustic, coming from village surroundings, coming, from culturally not so very sophisticated areas. But today with archaeology doing all the digging, especially along Magdala, Tiberias and all, it testifies that there was quite a flourishing community, okay, who engaged in a lot of trade, not only with the Romans, but along the coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon also. It lies only 500 feet away from the ancient town of Magdala. Now, coming to the demand for a sign, the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, asking for a sign from heaven to test him. Again, Jesus is doggedly being pursued by them. They refuse to see, okay, and acknowledge that the power that is the source of Jesus' ministry of healing and teaching is God Himself. They refuse to see it, and they are persistent with their belief that His power actually comes from Satan, and they are asking for a sign. So when they are asking for a sign, are they asking for a miracle? No, not at all. They are not asking for any miracle. They have been witnesses to so many miracles, okay, and through the miracles they can obviously see the Spirit of God at work, okay, the Holy Spirit of God. Yet they are blinded to all this. They want a spectacular sign from heaven, like He should summon some lightning or something like that. Only that. But this was very, very childish way of demonstrating faith, and Jesus dismisses them, and He just refuses to give him anything and just leaves them gaping along the shores and gets into the boat and goes away to the other side. So between the two boat trips, Mark reports this encounter between Jesus and the Pharisees, and Jesus does not give him any sign. They suspect that Satan is the source of his power. But this is important. Contrast their demand for a sign with the faith of a Syrophoenician woman who took Jesus at his word. Okay, she did not ask for any physical proof that her child was, freed from the demonic possession. She just took Jesus at his word. And here, this learned men, okay, the so-called doctors of the law, refused to attribute Jesus' power to the Holy Spirit of God. And Jesus is indignant at their hardness of heart and refusal to see the Ruach Kadesh. What is the Ruach Kadesh? Ruach means spirit, Kadesh is holy, the Holy Spirit of God. And so they refuse their request and goes off into the boat, crossing over to the next region. And here briefly, as they are going in the boat to the other side, they start talking among themselves, and look at the disciples. They have forgotten to bring bread, and they start, and they say only one loaf is there with them. And Jesus uses this occasion to tell them to be aware of what? Of the yeast of the Pharisees. What is yeast? Leaven. Leaven is used to, make the dough rise so that we can have bread. So here Jesus is equating the leaven, okay, to the influence, to the polluting influence not only of the Pharisees, but also of the Herodians, okay, and the yeast of Herod. When he talks about the yeast of Herod, he is referring to the Herodians. You remember earlier also they were similarly grouped together. So here, when they are asking, okay, when they are arguing about, they have forgotten to bring bread, Jesus uses this occasion to give them a lesson. They said to one another, "It is because we have no bread." And becoming aware of this, Jesus then questions them, and he's quite angry at them. Why are you talking about having no bread? These are the same men who have just witnessed another miracle of feeding, and yet they fail to see that the one who has provided bread to the multitudes can easily provide for them too. So Jesus is quite pained, okay, grieved at their failure to perceive what he wants them to see. Do you have eyes and faith to see? Do you have ears and faith to hear? And do you not remember? What is Jesus referring to? He's again trying to remind them, you have been personal witnesses before your very eyes. I have performed all the spectacular feats, and yet you have no faith. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, he asked them, how many baskets did you collect? And very sheepishly they said 12. And again he's saying, when I fed the 4,000, how many did you collect? 7. Then he said to them, do you not understand? Do you not yet understand? Let us see. The answer is obviously no. Okay? So Jesus is getting into this conversation. He brings it to the open. Jesus' growing frustration is very obvious over here. Okay? Indirectly, he's asking them, when will your eyes open and when will you really believe? Okay? They are seeing all this, and yet, they fail to comprehend that Jesus is much more than what he seems to be. They are believing, but in a very superficial way. That coming to faith is still not there. So the conversation centered on having forgotten to bring bread. I will not do this. Let me explain this only. The reference to the Pharisees probably comes from the encounter demanding a sign. Jesus has just had, demand from them, which made him, so very annoyed, and that's how he is traveling along in the boat. Jesus puts those questions to the 12, okay, I've already run you through them, okay, making them see how he has been at work in both the feeding miracles, and yet they are not able, okay, to see the power of God at work in him. But look at this, is very important. They fail to see, and Jesus is asking them questions, and in the end he asking them, do you not understand? Obviously the answer is actually no, they really do not understand. If the Pharisees are adamant in refusing to see Jesus for what he is, Mark is deliberately putting this, epistles one after another with a reason. He's trying to bring this, stark parallels between these two people, between his declared enemies and his own people who are his core group, who call his friends. If the Pharisees are adamant in refusing to see Jesus for what he is, his core disciples, the 12, are on the other hand equally dumb and insensitive to the divine presence of Jesus. Just like the Pharisees, they too fail to make the connection between the shepherd who cares for them in the wilderness and their trouble at sea, with the one who provides more than enough bread in the wilderness and their own need. So you see the striking parallels. Both of them are being painted in the same colors. If the Pharisees, okay, they are very rigid in their hatred of Jesus and want that he, come out with a spectacular sign to demonstrate that he is really performing all these deeds with the power of the Heavenly Father. Here the disciples, the 12, are nothing better. Okay? They also fail to see that connection. So, the answer to Jesus' question, okay, do you not understand, is after all, okay, a no. It is a no. I think you can't see this because this is coming out here. Okay? And they have yet to understand. They are still to come to faith. Finally, we have Jesus cures a blind man at Bethsaida. This we will be ending. They come to finally to Bethsaida. Remember, Bethsaida is right up to the north. This is the place from where Peter and Andrew actually came from. They relocated later on to Capernaum. Okay, but they were actually from there. Andrew from Bethsaida, they say. And even Philip was from Bethsaida. So they came to Bethsaida. Okay, they came by boat. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out to the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes, the same way, like how he did in the Gentile territory, and restored the deaf-mute back to power, okay, he asked him, can you see anything? He throws spittle on the ground. This is something very strange. because even throwing out something out from your body was considered to be, violating purity regulations, and yet Jesus does not stop at that. It is some way, maybe some ancient way of, stabilizing them in their belief that Jesus probably is doing this. And so he throws his spittle on the ground, mixes it with mud, puts it to the eyes of this blind man, and he asked the man, and the man looked up and said, Jesus asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Okay? This is something very amusing because this is the first time in the New Testament, in fact, we find a miracle happening, but not at one go. A second touch of Jesus is required. So again, then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently in his sight, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then he sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village." Now look at this trial, the emphasis of this is very beautiful. There is something that Mark is trying to, convey to us metaphorically through this incident of the healing of the blind man at Bethsaida. Jesus talking about not seeing and comprehending is in a way a dramatic preparation for the healing of the man who cannot see later on in 8:22-26. Okay, here. The story serves as a transition from the Galilean ministry of Jesus to the account of his way to Jerusalem. Remember, we will be going into the next section of Mark's Gospel. So this episode, it serves like a bridge to walk into the next section of Mark's Gospel, the way section. That is from chapter 8, verses 27 on, right up till 10:52, verse 52. Just as the healing of blind Bartimaeus, we will come later on in the later chapter at verse 46 to 52 of chapter 10. That will also serve as a transitioning bridge. This is, a unique linguistic device that Mark is using in the laying out of his gospel narrative. Okay, so here this incident is like, taking us into the next section, the focal section that we will be taking on next Sunday on. So the healing of the blind man at Bethsaida is the only miracle story in the NP in which a second touch of Jesus is required to effect total restoration of sight. The man sees unclearly, just like the naive, faith-lacking 12 who have continued to follow Jesus and have seen things without really perceiving. So when this man, first shot, he says, "I can see all trees are moving." So his sight is not fully restored. It is very blurry. His vision is blurry and he cannot see. And all this while, this is a metaphor also for our great disciples, the 12. They all who have been with Jesus all along, being witnesses to all his marvelous deeds, and yet for them their vision is not clear. Their vision too is very, very blurry. So a second touch of Jesus in the form of more efforts in training them is required. Okay, that is clearly evident in this. So here we come to out the picture. Come to the end of our session. We will be going to the second section. So one section of Mark's Gospel is over here. This is the end of session 17.